Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 10 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today, unusually, by my colleague and co-presenter, John, as always. Goodall, how are you doing today, John?
Very good, very good. Oh, I can't complain. For the followers of my DIY escapades that paid attention last week, I have had to replace my door handle. That's been done now. So I now have a new door handle in my office. That took me all of 10 minutes. That was all I could manage on a Sunday afternoon.
Well, I know people are also waiting with bated breath to hear about my chainsaw carburetor. So I did swap that over on Sunday morning, and fueling was perfect, which led to me chopping up a huge tree and filling 2 4x4 truckloads of branches and twigs to take to the local recycling centre. So wonderful weekend of DIY I had.
Can you re-say the word carburetor?
Carburetor.
Yes.
Carburetor. It's not pronounced the same in the good old US of A, is it? So
No.
How do you say the word carburetor, Brian?
America. That's how we say every word.
Carburetor. There we go.
Yeah.
Carb. Just call it a carb, and then but then we might get it confused with the things that we eat to give us energy. Yeah.
No, carbs are the enemy. You don't want to eat them.
The carburetor was my enemy a week ago, but with the new one arriving, it was everything was fine and dandy. So I must introduce our guest, who really needs no introduction because it is once again AWS hero Brian Tarbox, who is joining us for the 4th time on Logicast. So how are you doing today, Brian?
I'm doing really well. It's beginning to be not winter here. Although today, and I didn't convert to centigrade, but today started at 21 Fahrenheit and is going to top off at 63 Fahrenheit. Ooh, so everything's just crazy, but life at Kalen continues to be wonderful. Kalen really is the best place I've ever worked by far.
Glad to hear it. To hear it. So have you had any DIY troubles yourself recently, Brian, that you want to update the listeners on?
No. I did. It's not at all related, but I'm going to pretend it's related. I found a new brand of granola. It's coffee chocolate granola. And I have it in the morning with milk, and I have it in the evening with whiskey.
Oh, nice. So there is some left by the evening. Or by the morning.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
Curious as to when it disappears faster, to be honest. Probably with the whiskey, I would have thought. But
is that with a glass of milk and a bowl of whiskey, or?
No, bowl of whiskey that's a little too much. Especially, John, coming from you, and for the audience. The last time I saw these two, we were all in our cups. I think the phrase is at reInvent, trying to decide which after party to go to.
Well, when the beer is free, it always flows better, I find. So, yeah. Anyway, we're not here to talk about DIY disasters and Brian's choice of beginning and end of day snack. We are here to talk about AWS news. And as regular listeners to the podcast will know, once a week I curate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. Then John and I pick a set of the articles that we'd like to talk about with our guest, and we share them ahead of time. And sometimes the guests read them ahead of time, and sometimes they forget. But we're all seasoned professionals here who are very good at winging it. So we do have such a selection of articles for you to talk about this week. And the first is an article from the AWS database blog, which is all about automating Amazon RDS credential rotation with AWS Secrets Manager for primary instances with read replicas. And the first thing I thought when I read that title is it seems to be a very niche use case because it's quite a long title and it's quite specific. But John, what are your thoughts on this one?
So I think an awful lot is made about, you can see my cat in the corner there. I think an awful lot is made about automatic secret rotation for database credentials. I think an awful lot is made about it, right? Okay, yes, you should rotate them occasionally, but then you start getting into this whole, and it's the same with any password ever. You start getting into the whole world of, is it even worth bothering rotating it? Because it's only as secure as the last time you rotated it. And, if you do it every 90 days or every 30 days or whatever, it's secure for 1 minute and then it's potentially compromised for the entire rest of the period. So unless you're rotating it every microsecond, okay, reductors ad nauseum there a little bit, but it's of limited value. The process here is kind of interesting because if you have, for the uninitiated, RDS offers a feature called read replicas, which is, it does what it says on the tin, right? It's another instance that you can only read from. Cool. But because it's another instance, it has its own credentials. Makes sense, right? Makes sense. And in theory, you'd like those creds to be the same as your normal username and password for your main instance. I can understand that. That seems perfectly logical. What this completely falls flat on is the idea that you shouldn't be using the admin password to access your database from your application anyway. So, okay, that's a thing. And this is an awful lot of steps. This is an awful lot of steps for, why haven't you done this for me?
Exactly. When I read this, the first sentence says, when using Secret Manager to manage your master user passwords, you cannot create new read replicas for your database instance. And my brain said the next sentence is, and we've fixed this. But no, they have a process, and it's a 6-step process. But each of those 6 steps itself has 6 to 7 steps. So this isn't automate. This is we didn't. Sorry, I'm just taking over. But it's like, this is, we couldn't be bothered to do this. So here's this bizarre thing you can do with read replicas and lambdas, and the lambdas need to be checked, and then you need secret managers, and then you need roles and permissions, and then you have to get, the lambda has to have the ability to invoke the secret manager, and then environment managers, environment variables, and then timeout settings, and then no, bad dog.
So is this the sort of thing you think that people might actually invest the time in building and then find that it just becomes a feature later, and therefore that time was wasted?
Well, I mean, the fact that it hasn't become a feature already. I mean, the thing is, you're supposed to have. I mean, the reliability pillar says you should have read replicas. The security pillar says you should use Secret Manager. The we can't be bothered pillar says, pound sand.
It's well known that the best way of getting AWS to develop a feature is to do it yourself badly and then look again in 3 months. That's happened to me it's happened to me about 4 times, I think, which is weird. It's not a large number, but it's weird that it's happened that many times. It's a funny old thing, this, because these days, if you want automatic credential rotation for just a normal instance without any read replicas, okay, you don't have the enhanced availability and all that jazz, but whatever, let's gloss over that for the minute. It's just handled, it's done. And to the extent that even things like open source Terraform modules, you can just say manage, yes please, and it'll set it all up, and it's fine, it's wonderful, and it's great. But that catches people out more times than I'd care to admit, because you hand the creds over to, say, a customer. You built this, you put them in your password manager, you send them to a customer, and then a week later they go, I can't access it, what's going on? Oh yeah, no, you need to go and find them again. They're here, you could go and look for them if you want. How's my application supposed to get those? Oh yeah, you're not meant to use those anyway. You're supposed to kind of create your own ones for applications, because for least privs, because these are admin for everything. So what is this solving?
Not a problem you have, I guess.
No, it's read replicas are also a funny thing generally, right? Yeah, I get the point and I understand why they're good and all the rest of it. But when you start dealing with, like we have recently, with more, I don't want to call things like WordPress and Magento and other CMSs legacy, but let's call them opinionated applications, like third-party applications that work in a certain way. Again, this is, I'd love to have read replicas on my high traffic sites across the board, but I can't because my CMS doesn't support them. So this is I don't know, maybe I'm the wrong target for this. It's well written, and lots of credit to the authors on this one. I'm not bashing what they've written. It's very well done, but it's a lot of work for a problem that shouldn't exist, that is very niche, as you said at the outset, because the title's it's like an L-Reg title. It's really long, and it gives you the whole thing in one go.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it shouldn't be niche, because, to my mind, every database should have read replicas, depending on, and you should always have secret rotation. So this should be just standard, and it should be. I mean, to be honest, I was shocked when I read this. Is you can't create read replicas if you have Secret Manager for your data. What? It's like, come on. Anyway, blah blah blah.
Well, there we go. On that note, let's move along to our second article for this week, and this one is all about the announcement of Microsoft 365 for Word and Outlook integrations for Amazon Q Business. So talked a lot about Q recently, Q everything, because everything's now coming under the Q banner, it seems. But this week we're talking about Q Business and how you can now use Q Business in Microsoft Word and Outlook. So I guess if you're not using Copilot, but you're using Q Business across your wider business applications, this potentially could come in useful. But what are your thoughts, John, on this one?
Microsoft did this in the 90s. They called it Clippy.
Yeah.
They've reinvented Clippy. Okay. Clippy at least had a fun little icon. And I think for the time was remarkably good. I just turned it off immediately, but it was remarkably good. I think you're trying to write a letter. Would you like help with that? Okay, you've worked out vaguely what I'm doing. This feels like that, but AI.
I've got to be honest, I don't think I ever saw Clippy say anything other than, I think it looks like you're trying to write a letter. I literally don't think it ever gave me any other advice. That's about it. I think it was the only feature that it had.
But the other feature it had is you could change the icon, and so I changed it to a dog, and it still said, "I think you're trying to write a letter." But
that must have been everything that people did in the 90s. Was they opened Word because I'm writing a letter? That's all they did.
But the thing is with Word. So back in the day, I wrote my master's thesis in Word, so I became a Word expert, and I remember counting the number of items that were in just the top level menu. If you pull down every one of the top, and there were 132 options on the main menu, but you still might need AI to figure out, how do I set the goddamn margins?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe that's what this is solving. It's Q. Tell me how the hell I could get this to print and look nice, please.
Right.
It looks like your margins are too small. No, they're not. Just print the damn thing.
Right. I mean, it's funny because as much as I hate Google Docs with a burning passion, because Google Docs and Google Drive is the most unsearchable system that's ever been made, ever. And for Google,
Confluence is worse.
Okay, fair enough. It's a tie. But for a Google product to be completely unsearchable, so I hate Google Drive with a passion. But Word, I mean, it's like, who's still using? I mean, Word is a wonderful editor, but I don't know anyone who's still using it. And Outlook, oh my God. Okay, you guys are.
Me personally, probably not John, but because I'm
don't use Word. No,
more on the
I have
commercial
no need
side
for
of the
Word.
business. I still use it occasionally. Yeah, I still use it occasionally.
You're a fan of a fat client too, aren't you? I'm
I do
desperate
have
trying
the
to get you
Outlook
to use the
client,
web client.
I do have the Outlook client, but I'm rapidly falling out of love with the Outlook client on the Mac, particularly when it had phantom meeting invitations stuck in it the other day that made me prepare for meetings that no longer existed, which was quite annoying, really. And I had to completely remove my my Microsoft 365 account from Outlook and add it back in again to get rid of the phantom meetings. So yes, perhaps I ought to go down the browser route, but we digress. I mean, Q Business. Why might you want to use Q Business for this? I mean, because if you're using Outlook and you're using Word, you're probably using Copilot, right? Isn't that what everyone's doing nowadays if they're in the Microsoft ecosystem?
I don't know. I'm going to call this Clippy from now on. Q Business is now called Clippy, and I will hear no alternatives.
I think it needs a funky icon, like the the Sam Squirrel or something like that. Q needs a mascot. Q needs a mascot. Amazon.
Yeah, I mean, it says what it's kind of doing in the announcement, right? It's doing things like text transformation, improving readability, modifying writing style, whatever stuff that you'd probably use Grammarly for. I'm sure other grammar editors exist, but I've never used them. There's lots of tools that help you with this. There's like a Hemingway editor as well on the internet that will tell you how readable it is and tell you where things aren't readable and all that kind of thing. And I use that for my blog posts occasionally to get it to a kind of reading level that's not, you must have a university degree in this topic to understand it. It's let's get it down to that level. So I guess it's that kind of thing. I don't know. Maybe it can edit for brevity, because I know that's a lot of things. That's something that salespeople struggle with, I think.
But have you seen the cartoon of, it's two panels, and in the one panel, the guy is saying to a coworker, I used AI to turn this bullet point into a long, full-fledged email. And the other guy says, I used the AI to take this long email and summarize it down to bullet points.
I haven't seen that, but yeah, quite amusing.
And I will say, I use, my tool of choice is Perplexity. But I don't really want it integrated directly into my flow, because then I'd be tempted just to push send. I use Perplexity, I come up with a chunk, and then I rewrite it in place so that it, sounds like it came from a human. And then I copy it over.
That's the one thing that anything that you use for content creation, be that internal or external or whatever, it will never get your tone of voice right, ever, which is the whole, well, how can we tell if it's come from AI? You read it, spend 5 minutes, read it, you'll work it out real fast, because the tone is always just wrong.
Well, it's funny, because back in the day, I went through a phase where I had real carpal tunnel, whatever. And so I was using Dragon Dictate quite a bit. And one of the wonderful features of Dragon was you could tell it, here's my corpus of things that I've written in the past. So if I'm talking, I'm probably talking like this. So I was doing a lot of work with caching. And so it understood that if I said cache, I meant CACHE. And
as opposed to Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
CASH.
For all these document things, you can give it, one-shot or multi-shot learning, where you can say, make the document like this. But I want that built in. I want to have taught my copy. So here we get back to cattle and pets. I want my pet AI to have already ingested everything I've ever written before, so it can make it sound like that, use that style.
I'm sure there's a Black Mirror episode like that, and it got really creepy.
Yeah, trained on just you, on your content. That's what you want, absolutely. Anyway, let's move on from Amazon Q Business, or Clippy as it shall now forever be known.
Yeah, it's called Clippy, and I will hear no alternatives.
To our next article this week, which is an article on the AWS Compute blog, where AWS have introduced an enhanced local IDE experience for AWS Step Functions. So, John, thoughts on this? I know you're a fan of Step Functions, as you mentioned on the special episode last week, where we talked about your serverless podcast workflow, which is orchestrated by Step Functions to produce blog summaries of our podcast. But is this gonna help you?
I'm very annoyed by this. Very annoyed.
Not what I was expecting you to say.
Because it's in VS Code, and I don't like VS Code. Put it in a real IDE, for crying out loud. It's the only thing I ever find myself opening VS Code for is linting and kind of in place. Yes, it looks like it'll work. For Step Functions, it's the only thing I ever use it for, because I can't have that in IntelliJ, because I spend money on an IDE like a normal person. The functionality is fine. It's great. It's whatever. I don't know. how much I'll use it because it's not my day job. I mean, it used to be. It's kind of where I kind of picked up all of this was because it used to be my day job to work on these. But, these days I shout at WordPress and I hit my head against CMS tools and I swear at Terraform quite a lot. So I don't do huge amounts of this in my day job anymore. Visual editors are great. The Workflow Studio is fine if you need to use a visual editor. They work for some people, but when you start looking at doing, dev staging prod and variable substitution, they all kind of start to fall over. And I don't think this integration into VS Code kind of solves for that still. It kind of does, but again, it's I don't know. It's making it all more kind of drag and drop and click opsy and okay, yeah, I can run tests from within VS Code and that's all great and that's all wonderful. It's a really nice update, but I'd love it to be in more editors.
Well, and the other thing I'd say is that, well, first of all, this is the first one of the three that might actually be useful. Maybe you don't like it, but it's actually something that's arguably useful. But I think that Amazon sometimes reminds me of the old parable of if you take over, if you're an executive and you take over a division, find everything that's distributed and centralize it, and find everything that's centralized and distribute it. So we're all doing IAC. We shouldn't do ClickOps and we shouldn't do the command line. It's like, oh, except for when we should. Yes, let's enhance the CLI, but don't use the CLI. And let's enhance the console, but don't do ClickOps. So, I love step functions. And I guess you do want to have them be visual and drag and drop and so on. But I don't know. I wonder about whether we should be just doing Terraform or CDK, whatever. But pick your poison.
Would you do this with Terraform, John? Did you do it with Terraform when you created the?
This isn't quite that. So no, I used SAM because Terraform is not amazing at handling serverless things. So I used SAM. This particular thing is it's not actually that new in VS Code. It's improved and it's gotten better and there's a bunch of new features. But for a very long time, VS Code using the AWS Toolkit has been able to render your step functions. And that's amazingly useful because you can go, yes, there's no errors. There's no kind of logical syntax errors. Everything throws through. There's no orphan states. Everything can start and finish and data moves around and all that jazz. So that's great. How much more of this I'm going to use, I don't know, because like I say, it's not my day job. The colors are nice, I guess. It's in color now and it wasn't before. I guess that's nice.
Color's always good. Yeah, color's always good.
I do wonder, has anyone come up with sort of style guides or best practices for how complex a step function should be?
I don't know that there's a guide for it, but at the London Summit in 23, I want to say, I got a look at the VIP ordering step function workflow that the Lego group use. And I thought I kind of knew what I was doing with them. And I looked at it and my head just melted. It was enormous. And
how many steps in that function?
Over 100. And some of them were calling out to like nested. It was a standard workflow that was calling out to nested express workflows to move things around. Like, oh, wow, okay, I think you've gone too far down this chain and you need to look at choreography a little bit more than orchestration, because that's a lot.
Right. Well, it's funny because the step function editor, of course, looks a lot like the not config, connect, the connect workflow. I did some connect workflow, and those can get crazy large, and it's 2025 and we're enhancing a flowchart. I remember flowcharts from the 70s, man.
Excuse me. Well, on that note, let's move along to something a little bit more modern than 70s flowcharts. We're getting into agentic coding, which is right at the bleeding edge of what's going on in the world of AI at the moment. At least
because every time I say the word
agentic,
agentic, my eyes bleed.
Yeah, there we go. Well, you better get the tissues ready then, John, because we're about to talk about agentic coding. This is an article on the AWS DevOps and Developer Productivity blog. The title is A Lightning Fast New Agentic Coding Experience Within the Amazon Q Developer CLI. So sticking with Q, but not the same Q as the previous Q that we talked about. This is a different Q. This is the Q Developer CLI. So, Brian, tell us a bit about agentic coding.
Okay. So we've talked about Q and we've talked about agentic. So we have our two bingo cards. And I will say full disclosure. My day job is mostly working with agents. But again, so much to say here. CLI, or maybe we should call it the QLI. And Clippy spelled with a Q instead of a C.
There we go. Genius.
However, as a developer, I spend much time at the command line interface. Oh, really? Really? I guess it's powerful. I will say I've read just this morning some people talking about security, and if you give this thing access to your shell, you're giving it access to all your environment variables, and privacy and security and stuff. And so I wonder. I do wonder. I mean, it's a year ago everything had to be LLMs, and now everything has to be an agent. And I don't know if you've seen the news, but the new Alexa Plus that's going to be all LLM driven. It's also they're not really calling it agentic, but whereas the old Alexa would call a variety of skills applications, now they're calling it's going to be calling a whole bunch of agents. And so developers will be creating agents that can do little things. But along those lines, I will make a shameless plug for a blog that my company Kayland is about to publish. I don't think they've quite published it yet. Called "The Art of Designing Bedrock Agents: Parallels with Traditional API Design." And so it's it's written by this brilliant author. That'd be me. Shameless plug. But back in the day, people would write C libraries, and you had a hierarchy of people who would write libraries and then people who would use libraries. And I think we're going to have the same sort of thing: people who write agents and the people who use agents. And there's all kinds of parallels about naming and scope, and how much should a thing do. And one of the places where it's really becoming interesting is the companies that are saying, okay, I want to be in this space because this is a hot new space. So I need to hire ML engineers. Ooh, they're really rare and they're really, really expensive. And it's like, okay, but are you really going to be tuning an LLM, or are you going to be writing agents? And if you're writing agents, maybe you have a different skill set, and maybe you're looking for people who are just good engineers. Like that's easy too. But anyway, so I give them this article. I give it credit for using a buzzword. I don't know that we should. I don't know that I want to be doing so much in the shell that I need AI for the shell. Git add, git commit, git push. I don't need Clippy helping me with that. It looks like you're trying to call it git push. Maybe you should do git push. It's like, thank you so much.
Would you like help rebasing this repository?
Oh my God. Oh yeah. Git squash. Yeah, no. So I don't know. Maybe I'm missing the boat, and this is the cool new thing. But
I don't know. I get unreasonably annoyed whenever I see Q anything in the CLI, because, and go with me here, this used to be Fig, and Fig was useful. Fig was helpful. Fig was basically an integrated man page that was doing fuzzy lookups as I typed, right? Because I knew roughly what I was looking for, and it would just start spitting things out and go, oh yeah, I want that command, and I want this, and I want that. And that was really useful. And then Fig got bought by AWS, and then it got turned into Code Whisperer for the CLI, and then Code Whisperer got munged into Q Developer, and now I see this and I get annoyed because I used to have a tool that I liked, and now I don't have it because I refuse to use it.
Does it do the same things or not?
No, it's worse. It's worse.
Hmm.
It's the same sort of conversation we had last week about chatbot becoming Q Developer, but in Slack. It did one thing, and it did it really well. Fig, in this case, did the one thing it did was, like I say, it was like a dynamic manual, right? You started typing commands, and it knew, I think, all of the AWS CLI, some common OS commands. It knew basically every Git command in creation. Basically what I do quite a lot, because I'm not a developer, so I do spend a lot of time in the shell because I just sort of can't help it for what I tend to do. And that was really useful because it meant I didn't have to look up manual pages. I didn't have to look up API docs. It knew what I was trying to do because I knew the first bits of the command, and it would fill it out from there. I don't have that tool anymore, and I'm sore about it.
But you're refusing to use this one. Do you think maybe you're going to be assimilated at some point and you'll have no choice? Or
yes, because we are the Borg and resistance is futile. I don't know.
The thing is, the lead sentence in the last paragraph is, if you're a developer who spends a significant amount of time in the CLI, I highly
stop it.
Right. Exactly. I highly recommend trying out the Q Developer Agent or install VS Code.
Well, there you go. You do have an alternative. Probably not what the author had intended when he wrote the article. But on that note, let's move along to our final article for this week. And Brian, I'm not sure if this is something that you are aware of. We've spoken about it on the podcast a number of times before. But in the UK, there has been a Competition and Markets Authority probe into concerns over the dominance of Amazon Web Services and Microsoft in the UK cloud players market. And this was an article on their publictechnology.net where, surprise, surprise, Amazon and Microsoft have refuted the CMA competition concerns, but smaller players have endorsed the watchdog's findings. So
I like they're calling Google a smaller player. Okay,
well,
in that specific space, yes,
I mean,
they are.
They're pretty big, but in that space, they are smaller. There's no,
It's the only thing you could accuse Google of being small at, I think, is cloud provision.
Well, I will say, so full disclosure, I'm an Amazon hero, so I've waterboarded the Kool-Aid, which is still a phrase I want to become viral. But I have used Measure and GCP, and while all three companies have their share of evilness, Google is, give up on privacy. Why? I mean, that's their mantra. That's their DNA. Why anyone would use them for anything business critical is just beyond me. So anyway.
I mean, you might have waterboarded the Kool-Aid. We're still community builders, so we're marinated in the stuff. Let's be honest here.
I did wonder why heroes had private rooms at most events. I guess that's where the waterboarding happens.
Oh, we're so getting banned on YouTube for that. Let's go back on message real briefly. So Google is complaining about Microsoft's software licensing practices and giving an adverse effect on competition. Okay, I agree with that. Yes, they do have harmful licensing practices, and this is well known. Next, Google doesn't. AWS talks about misconceptions, key characteristics of the cloud industry being barriers and pro-competitive. It's okay. Government department has been big and meandering and bumbling, and the people that have been attacked by the probe don't like it, and the people that stand to benefit are all for it. In other news, water continues to be wet.
I mean, this has been dragging on for a long time now, and it doesn't, nothing new seems to be coming out of it. Really, I'm not sure what the eventual outcome might be. Whether there might be some legislation around these licensing practices or not, but we don't seem to be getting any closer to that. I don't think it's fair to say there's no competition in the market. There's always been competition in the market. It's just that some people have done better than others at grabbing market share.
This is where you come to the tier 1, 2, 3 cloud providers, right? And it's kind of unfair to call VPS providers tier 3 cloud providers, because the only one that comes to mind is Hetzner, but I'm sure there are others. DigitalOcean, maybe. I don't know. OVH, yeah, these sorts of people. They're not the same thing. And I do wonder how much of an outsized influence that kind of provision has on this process, because the people that work at the CMA, I don't know anybody that works at the CMA, but I do know some people that work in the civil service. By and large, they're non-technical and don't understand this. They wouldn't understand the difference. Oh, it's the cloud. I'm sorry, it's your accounting package saying this is the cloud version doesn't make it cloud. That's not how this works.
Do you have similar issues in the US, Brian, or because these are all US companies, does nobody care?
Well, I'm still just waiting for a mandate that everyone start using Tesla Cloud. Sorry, John, I tried to get that done while you were still drinking. No, we have no issues in America. Everything's fine. Everything's awesome, man.
Well, that's probably an entire another podcast, which is not really talking about AWS news, is it?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. The notion of any of these companies pointing fingers at each other is just, astonishing. I mean, I will say I love Amazon Web Services. I'm not a fan of Amazon Retail for a whole host of reasons. And I think Amazon Retail is hurting the AWS brand. But it's not like Google is anything but evil. And Microsoft complaining about lockout, it's like
they got in trouble themselves in that on the desktop side of things because of the whole Internet Explorer malarkey. It's like pot, kettle, have you met?
Right. The only thing that's actually quite interesting is that IBM seems to continue to run under the radar.
Under the radar or under the ground?
Well, they're still big, but they seem to not get much attention. But I mean, for decades, it was IBM versus Microsoft. And I think Microsoft has just decided not to have a target on its back, or IBM has decided not to have a target on its back.
Yeah, they bought Red Hat and then went all quiet all of a sudden.
Well, they definitely not had a say in this particular article about this particular probe. But there we go. On that note, we have... sorry, Brian, did you have something else to say before I wrap up?
Yeah, I will say, just because you guys are Brits and I haven't yet made a reference to Premier League football. This investigation to me feels just like the IFAB investigation into Manchester City for financial fair play rules, and it will be decided at some point. Manchester City has been accused of 132 violations of financial fair play rules, and of course they have. They're guilty on all of those. But meanwhile, Everton or Aston Villa or something just got a $700,000 fine for criticizing one of the referees. And it's like, come on. So anyway, I look forward to CMA investigating Manchester City.
I'm not sure they have any authority in that particular jurisdiction, but yeah, there we go. It's an interesting take on it. But
well, Manchester City probably has more money. They probably have more money than any of these companies.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised.
Since we're on that, did you see Manchester United has announced plans for a 100,000 seat new stadium? Still without any good players, but it's going to be a magnificent stadium.
Is it in Manchester or is it somewhere else?
I don't know.
Are they still owned by Americans, or is that moved on now?
Don't follow.
Well, I know that Liverpool is owned by the same folks who own the Boston Red Sox.
Well, that makes sense because Liverpool also wear red socks. So yeah, when they're playing at home. But yeah. Obviously, whoever owns both of those sporting clubs has just got a fetish for red socks.
Indeed.
And on that note,
on that note, I think we have reached the end of our time for this week's episode of Logicast. So that was season 4, episode 10 of Logicast. So thank you for joining us. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Don't forget, we are available from wherever you download your podcasts. And if you'd like to see the funny faces we're pulling while we're talking, you can also watch us on YouTube. So all that remains is me to thank our guest, Brian Tarbox. Thank you once again, Brian, for joining us and sharing your insights on AWS. Yeah, always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure with you guys. And I'll say, if you're a top-notch cloud person, come join Kalen, because we're the real thing.
And thank you, John, as always, for your insights. And Brian, don't forget to share that link to the blog post that maybe is about to be published, and we'll pop it in the show notes.
Right.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time.